Dr. DeYoung serves in the Math and Science Department at Grace College in Winona, Indiana. He joined the Grace facility in 1972 with sabbatical leaves in California, Europe, and the South Pacific. He's a graduate of Michigan Tech University, Iowa State University, that's our home state, Don, and Grace Theological Seminary. His science writings have appeared in many periodicals, and he's written 20 books on Bible science topics, including object lessons for children. DrDonDeYoung is currently the president of the Creation Research Society. That society has 1,700 members worldwide, and it funds research, publishes a technical quarterly journal, and operates a laboratory in Arizona. So Don speaks on a broad range of Bible science topics and believes that the details of nature are a powerful testimony to the Creator's care for mankind. Dr. DeYoung and his wife Sally have 3 married daughters, and in the local church in Winona Lake, Don is an adult Bible fellowship teacher. So let's welcome DrDonDeYoung.
Well, thank you, Judy, and thanks, folks, for coming out on a snowy night. And appreciate visiting the Denver Society of Creation. Thanks for starting up that new group. You guys are pioneers, and may you grow and prosper. That's a neat idea. Let me say hello from Indiana, where I live, actually in Winona Lake. You ever heard of that town? It's kind of a Bible conference grounds from years gone by. It's where Billy Sunday lived. You know that name, evangelist from a century ago. It's where Billy Graham had his start back in the good old Midwest. I teach at Grace College back there, and, physics and math, and I'm still at it, that kind of thing. So real happy to join you folks for a while tonight. Well, I thought we would talk about space. That kind of tires you out just thinking about it, I guess. But, you know, it's a wonderful area, the Bible and astronomy, so we'll kind of specialize and look at that. Plus, we'll do a few other things as well. What do you think? Do they go together, the Bible and astronomy? They surely do. God gave us His book, and He also created the heavens. So we'll see what we can do here. I thought maybe we'd just start out with a few little quiz questions for you, thinking here on a Thursday night. So yeah, a little identification. What are we looking at here? Looks like a big basketball, huh? But you're right, this is the first satellite. This is Sputnik, 60 years ago. 57, some of us remember that. Didn't last too long, but kind of the beginning of the space age back at that time. Got a couple more quiz questions for you. What will we be looking at here? This thing goes right over Colorado now and then. It's the International Space Station, and they keep building onto this thing. You can look at the internet and see when it's coming by. And it's a steady light, moves about as fast as an airplane does, but it's not blinking. And with binoculars, you can see a little structure there now. They built it large enough. So there's guys and gals up there. I don't know what they're doing, trying to stay alive, I guess. But that's the space station. Yeah, got one more here. This is kind of a more recent picture. What world would that be? Lots of swirling gases there, lots of turbulence. This place is bigger than the Earth. This is a recent picture from just the last year or so from a close-up of Jupiter. And this outer planet is gaseous. You couldn't stand there, and all these poisonous gases swirling around, but what a detailed picture. So we catch just this one glimpse of it. And the whole universe is full of this kind of variety and glory that goes on, and I guess maybe God and the angels enjoy it, but we just get one quick look now and then. Amazing pictures from space. I thought maybe a good approach would be just to kind of ask some questions together and then kind of come up with some tentative answers. So I don't know how many questions I have, but here's the first one. Was there a Big Bang? We've all been brought up with this idea. You know, it's in the newspapers, it's on the television specials. The story is that long ago, 13+ billion years ago, the whole universe was a concentrated little nugget. And one day it became unstable and started to expand and got bigger and bigger, the Big Bang. And over the eons of time, it slowly cooled off, and after a while, stars formed, and then planets, and then people, and here we are. It makes quite a story. Do you believe all this stuff? You know, it's one of these typical origin stories that is temporary. They come and go. In fact, before this was around, there was what was called the steady state theory. And it appears that the Big Bang is now on its way out. I'm not sure what the next one will be, multiple universes or whatever, but they don't seem to get it right. In fact, instead of that long time scale, here's a verse from the good book. For God spoke, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast. That does not sound like some slow, gradual expansion. I guess there was a big bang. God spoke and bang, there it was, you know, quickly, suddenly, in 1 week. So I'm sticking with that because science keeps changing these new theories, these new origin ideas, and of course the Book of Psalms does not change. We've got it. It tells how things happen. I'll put a couple more words at the bottom there, a little bit of ex nihilo. What does that stand for? That's Latin. Means from nothing. Nada. Yes, from nothing. Now, you know, some of us are creative. Some of you can do landscaping or photography, but we always work with some kind of, you know, materials. When God creates, let there be light, and there it was. He doesn't need any starting materials like we do. Really, only God creates in the biblical sense. So, yeah, this whole idea of the Big Bang Theory, I think this makes a much better view of it all. Let me even back up further here for a minute. This whole idea of creation in this society that you've started, is this even needed anymore? You know, this is the modern day. Does biblical creation even matter? There it is in the book of Genesis so long ago, and this is the scientific age. What do you think my answer is? Of course, I'm on your side, and I believe it does matter. In fact, a little story that goes with this that you can find in the book of Acts. The Apostle Paul was visiting that city of Athens, Greece. Back in his day, it was a capital city. All the intellectuals were there, the big shots. All the knowledge was there. And Paul was kind of walking around the city. Now, these people had a lot of knowledge, but they didn't know about the God of the Bible. In fact, they had lots of gods. They even had one set up to an unknown God, just in case they missed anybody. And so I was wondering, how does Paul address people like this, who are very knowledgeable, but again, they don't know who made it all and who we're accountable for it. Well, over in Acts 17, there's a few references, part of Paul's talk to them. And I would just go in with a couple of the verses here. This is Paul speaking. Now, what you worship as something unknown, I'm going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. And then the verse goes on, from one man we all came. I was thinking about Paul addresses these people. You see what he's doing? He's going back to the beginning. What a novel idea. To start with Genesis, talking to these worldly people of his day. Now, in the next verses, he does go on and he gives the gospel, and it says some of the people of Athens believed and some didn't. But this is how Paul began. Well, if that made sense in Paul's day, I think it still does today. Because we are surrounded by similar people to Paul's day. People that they don't know about the one who we're going to be accountable to. You know, to so many people, the word Jesus is a swear word. It's just crazy what's happening in this world. And so I think it's good to kind of start by telling people that there is a God who made everything, that we will stand before someday. Then certainly go on with the whole gospel message in the New Testament. But the starting point, creation, much needed. And as we know, the book of Genesis, that's where marriage begins and the importance of life. This all gets kind of preachy, but it's good stuff. So I've got a bunch of questions here as we're looking at them tonight. And I'll get back to astronomy in a moment here, but I'm just kind of doing some other things as well that I've thought about. Those days of creation. Remember, day one, God makes light. Day two, there's a separation of water, and on it goes. What were those days like? Now, some people say maybe there were gaps between some of those days and verses in Scripture. Gap theory. Other people say, well, maybe those days were long periods of time. That's sometimes called a day-age theory. And I've read these different ideas, and I think, are we trying to help God out with those theories? No, really. God doesn't need our help when it comes to creation, does he? Couldn't he have made everything in a nanosecond if he wanted to? Or he could have spread it out over trillions of years and still been at it. But I think Scripture is quite clear that everything was made in 6 days, just like this week that we have going by this week. After all, Genesis 1 and 2, talks about the evening and the morning and the first day and the second day. How much more clear could it be? I believe God did that for us, the way he spread out creation over a week. In fact, thinking about that, where does our week come from, our 7-day week? The moon does not have a 7-day cycle. The planets don't. How do we come up with 7 days? I believe that this reflects right back to the creation week. The calendar on the wall is a witness to the creation. There's other ideas where it could come from, but I think it's coming from the beginning, from Genesis. Now, thinking of the calendar, over the years, some people, some cultures have been a little bit embarrassed about the calendar, about the week with its 7 days, because that sounds biblical. And so some places, they have tried to change the length of a week. How do you like that? Here, let me show you a couple of examples of this. In France, back in the revolutionary time, they thought, let's have a 10-day week. I don't know, isn't a week long enough already? I'm not sure what they called the other 3 days, but it was sort of like a decimal type week. And they thought, that'll eliminate any kind of biblical reference to our timekeeping. Well, when they set up this 10-day week, people got thoroughly confused. They didn't know when to go to work, when to do what, and society started to break down. They went back to a 7-day week. Then another experiment was tried in Russia a century ago. They thought, okay, we don't like 7 days, let's have a 5-day week. In fact, their week went like this, folks. They went Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, back to Monday. They deleted the Saturdays and Sundays right off the calendar. Anybody in favor of that? Doing away with weekends, my goodness. Well, the Russian people like weekends as much as anybody does, and once again, riots broke out, give us back our 2 days, and people were killing each other, it was crazy. They went back to a 7-day week. The Russian idea, by the way, was to work for the motherland every day of your life, and people said, no, we need a day of rest. And so these efforts have failed. You can't get away from this 7-day week. It's part of our psyche, part of our makeup, all part of the creation week, I believe. And by the way, that verse that I skipped over, I think also goes strongly with the idea of a literal creation week. In 6 days, God made the heavens and earth, and then rested on the 7th day. There it is, the calendar on the wall, a wonderful witness to the creation. Now, if you need some encouragement in this whole area, we've got a lot of friends on our side if you like biblical creation. Here are some of the pioneers in math and science from days gone by. And any one of those people, if they were still around, they could give a talk to your group. Because these were all godly men and women. And they had a high view of Scripture, book of Genesis, and I find these people encouraging. Now, not everybody's on the list, but many of them are. These are brilliant people, and they had it right. They realized that God had made everything in the first place. Let me just pick out one name for a minute here. Do you see, looking around, Maria Mitchell on the left? Eminem, Maria Mitchell. You say, well, who is she? Did she live in Colorado? I don't know her. Now, she goes before the days of photography, so they made these pictures of her. Maria Mitchell was the first woman astronomer in North America. She lived out in Massachusetts. So here we are in the 1800s. This gal was just gifted by God to look at the sky and discover things. It's interesting, some people just are. And she found lots of comets. I haven't discovered any. Have you? she must have been out every night after supper looking at the sky, and she would find these comets. And that's what she's known for. And, you know, she was before her time. You know, women were not really accepted much in science in those early days, but she did better than the guys did. She was also a mathematician, and I've read some of her material. And I remember one of her quotes from Maria Mitchell involving math. She wrote, "Every formula is a hymn of praise to God." Think about it. Well, you say, I don't even like formulas. But that was her life. And she realized that formulas are showing the language of creation, the language of nature, and to study those and find them was like a hymn of praise. And she was right. She had style, I like this gal. In fact, maybe some morning, like in church on Sunday morning, instead of special music, you should have someone do formulas on a blackboard. You'll lose the crowd, you know, we're just not with it anymore. But that's kind of what she was hinting at, that the beauty, the symmetry of mathematics is there. But that's a different area. I better keep moving along here. Well, we're back to some of the questions we're looking at. And how about this one? Eclipses. You know, sometimes the moon moves through the Earth's shadow. That's what this picture is. It's a total eclipse of the moon. This happens once or twice a year. And the moon kind of gets this ruddy orange color. It lasts for a couple of hours. Pretty neat how that happens. A moon eclipse. And then you have the other kind when the moon moves in front of the sun and the sun gets covered. So here's kind of a tropical picture, it looks like. And that's the sun in the background, and it has a bite out of it because that's the moon partially eclipsing it. You know, when you think about this, the sun and the moon, they're about the same size in the sky. How big are they, like a quarter? You know, they're very large, but a long ways away. How is it that the moon is able to cover the sun, or the other way around? The sun is so much bigger. In fact, it's 400 times larger than the moon. But the moon is also 400 times closer. There's a perfect match so that they look the same size in the sky, and the moon can cover the sun. In the astronomy books, they call that a coincidence, that they have the same size in the sky, the greater light during the day and the lesser light at night. I think God planned it that way, so we can enjoy even that kind of phenomena of eclipses going on. Well, you know, speaking of eclipses, there was one in August. Did some of you maybe travel to see it? Did you? Wonderful. We were down in Kentucky to watch it, and this is when it gets dark in the middle of the day. Now that's more rare, and then it's just dark for a couple of minutes, but well worth the trip. And I wanted to mention, in case you missed that one, the next one is 7 years from now. They're very rare, but when they do come, they start to come like in bunches. So here we have one in 2024. Oh, it's going to miss Colorado again. But along that line, there's going to be the path of totality. It is coming through part of Indiana. I'm looking forward to that at that time. So yeah, and I think all this kind of thing, as that verse says, shows God's faithfulness. That we can predict this stuff to the very minute when it's going to happen years ahead, following these laws that God has established. Anyway, if we had one in August, and you missed that, and this was going to miss Colorado. Now, if you look way ahead, I was just thinking what's coming here. In 2045, now you're going to have one that goes right through Colorado. So that might be worth hanging on for a while. 2045. That's the next big one here. That's 28 years from now. And you can see that path, and that is going right through the middle of the country, including through your area here in Denver. So, well, maybe some of us will be looking down on it from above at that time. But who cares? It is time to move on. But kind of neat how these things just right on schedule, the way they move, eclipses, showing how God has set up the whole thing, moving so faithfully. So we're looking at some questions and answers. We had the days of creation, eclipses caused by the distance and the size of these things. How about think a little bit about the moon? And so the thought here is, where did the moon come from? So I'm not going into deep space here. I'm trying to stay close to home here where I can think about this. The moon really is our nearest neighbor in space, and we've traveled we did go to the moon, didn't we? They have these television programs where they kind of doubt that, but it was quite a deal back in the 60s and 70s. In fact, we left instruments on the moon that are still being monitored. So, yes. And over the years, one of the big questions has been, how did that moon get to be circling the Earth? I mean, there it is. Now, God put it there. But in this modern day, we need to have more scientific answers. So let me show you what they've done over time to figure out how the moon got to be circling the Earth. So way back in the 1960s, it was called the fission theory. Now, I know this looks like a bowling pin, or maybe a turkey drumstick. What am I looking at? Anyways, a friend of mine drew this as an artist. And the suggestion is that a long time ago, the Earth was young, and it was spinning a lot more rapidly than it does now, and some material kind of fissioned or broke off from the moon to broke off the Earth to become the moon. It fissioned off. That'd be kind of exciting to see that happening in space. And so this was in all the books, the fission theory. But this idea went away in 1969 because that's when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. They picked up some rocks, they brought them back to the Earth, and they're different. It's not new elements, but the proportions, just the mineral, there's enough differences. It does not look like the moon came from the Earth. And it was a neat idea, but it went away. By the way, this idea was first suggested actually 100 years ago by George Darwin. Now, Charles Darwin had 10 children. They didn't all live, but the ones that did, several went into science, including George here, one of Charles' sons. He became an expert on the tides and on the moon, so this was his idea, and lasted up until the 60s, and then away it went. So this moon origin idea got replaced in the 1970s by the capture theory. The suggestion this time is that the moon just came from somewhere else. And in this case, it's kind of sneaking in from the bottom of this picture. And it came close to the Earth, and we reached out with our gravity and captured it, so it's been going around us ever since. Now, if a moon would come close to the Earth, it would feel our gravity. In fact, that outer part of that circle, it would kind of swoop around us. But you know what would happen after about half of a turn? You're going to lose it. In fact, I think I drew one little arrow. There it goes. It'll just take off like a stone out of a slingshot. To capture the moon, you would have to put the brakes on, carefully insert it into orbit. And how do you do that with these spontaneous origin theories? It doesn't work very well. So capture went away and got replaced in the 1980s with the nebula theory. Now that means a cloud of dust or gas, something that's nebulous. So the thought this time is that you had these two big clouds of dust. They look like thumbprints. And gravity just made those collapse, and so the moon and the Earth formed side by side. As before, there's a problem. There's always a problem with these natural theories. There are lots of these nebulae in space. You can see them with a small telescope. And almost every one of those clouds in space, you know what they're doing? They're expanding, they're stretching out because gas forces are so large. To get this to happen, somehow you'd have to squeeze it from the outside. And how do you do that with these natural theories? So it went away. How are we doing so far? Fission, capture, nebula. This doesn't go on all night. But I just got one more here, origin theory, since nothing else works. Now this one's hung on for a little bit longer. They are now thinking catastrophes. And the suggestion is that long ago, this big space rock came down and struck the Earth. And this rock was as big as Mars. And you can see the clouds down there at the bottom. And it hit the Earth so hard that the Earth fractured into pieces. And some of the fragments flew up into the sky and then coalesced together to make the moon. And the remaining Earth kind of tumbled back together. They don't have all the details figured out yet. But there it was, the collision theory. Well, the main trouble with this one is it doesn't happen. God didn't set up this whole solar system so that the Earth gets hit with something that knocks it into pieces. We get hit with small things like meteors and meteorites, but that's something that cracks the Earth, the probability goes to 0. So that's kind of where it stands. They don't know where the moon came from, how it got to circling the Earth. Now think about that. The moon is their nearest neighbor to us. If the astronomer world could figure out anything, it ought to be the moon. And it's a mystery. And maybe after a while, a person just wants to humbly speak up and say, maybe the moon can't be explained. Maybe somebody put it there. Now, maybe that's not science in the modern sense. It has to be natural. But I think it makes a good case that the moon is beyond us and that it shows creation, and God placed it in the sky. And one thing I like about this whole creation view and you know, the cornerstone of your society here, when you say God created things like the moon, it is not by chance or accident, but there's purpose, there's reasons. So let's think about the moon for a moment. Why did God put the moon in the sky? Would you miss it if it was gone? Does it do anything for you, the moon? I was giving a talk somewhere, and the group wasn't as friendly as you folks are. And I was talking about how important the moon is, and this fella stood up and said, "We don't even need the moon anymore. We've got flashlights." And I said, "Can't you do any better than that?" Of course, that's one of the ideas of the moon, that it is a nightlight. And maybe we do have flashlights today, but for a lot of history, that moonlight has been very important and still is to a lot of people on Earth. And so I'm thinking on purposes of the moon, what else does it, anything come to mind?
Tides.
Oh, the tides. Of course, here we are stuck in Colorado, but the tides in the oceans, that's a good one. Yeah. Anything else?
Keeps the rotation. Keeps the rotation steady.
The moon does influence the rotation and the seasons, yes. We're still learning more things about the moon. And I kind of started a list. Now, this is incomplete, but here's just a few things that the moon does for us. It's a nightlight. Some nights a full moon, some nights no moon at all, but there it goes. It is so regular. You can tell time by the moon. It's a calendar. In fact, much of the animal world work on biorhythms. They're connected with the moon in their phases. You can tell direction with the moon. It's a compass. And here's the idea we've learned in just the last couple of decades, that the moon stabilizes our seasons, the tilt of the Earth. Remember how the globe is tilted 23.5 degrees? Without the moon, the Earth's axis would wobble, and we might go from winter to harder winter. You'd never know what was coming next. Thank you, Lord, for the moon. We like seasons. There's the tides. And I had one more word there, life. And by that, I'm thinking your life and mine. It goes like this. If there was no moon, there would be no tides. The oceans going back and forth. And that's a major component of the ocean currents. Now, there's a lot of life in the oceans. There's a lot of critters, and there's a lot of plants in the ocean. Aren't there other plants in the ocean? There's kelp forests, there's the grass of the sea, the floating things, the plankton. Of course, plants make oxygen. Current estimates are that the ocean plants make half of the air that we breathe. Half of it. So, if there's no moon, there are no tides, the ocean will become stagnant, and all those plants will die. Oh, no air. No us. Our very breath depends on the moon circulating the ocean, keeping it healthy. Even in a world that's far from perfect due to the fall, due to the curse, and everything else, you can still see how this is all put together for our well-being, including the tides. And sometimes I wonder, that list may just be the beginning. What does the moon do that we're not even aware of yet? But those kind of studies go on. So anyway, I like the moon. It's a good witness to the creation, just like the calendar was. Okay, well, I'm moving a little bit further away from home here now. This is our neighborhood. Remember the planets? And oh yes, there's Pluto. Demoted the last few years. They decided to call it a dwarf planet, but it's still there, whatever they want to call it. And so here's a few thoughts on Pluto. Last year, for the first time, a probe finally got out there to take a close look at it. Now, it's a 7-year trip to get out there with the New Horizons space probe. It's cold and dark out there, and they thought, you know, what'll happen? So they took pictures and sent them back to Earth, however they do that. Amazing technology that engineers have. So here's what we've learned about Pluto. Here's what it looks like. Never seen before. Wow. At least it's round. You know, gravity kind of pulls in and makes everything round. And there's a little bit more detail there than was expected. You see that big whitish area at the bottom there? That's a snow field. Not just water snow, but a number of frozen chemicals. And there are mountains on the moon, and there are ravines and valleys. There's some geology there. It's amazing. It was thought there could be nothing out there, but there's a lot. I don't know whether it's created that way or what's happened over our few thousand years of history, but there's a lot of detail that needs to be studied there on Pluto. In fact, I was looking at this picture, that snowfield down in the corner. There's even an interesting shape to it if you look at it close. You see it? It's a heart. Now, I was trying this on my wife, Sally, and she said, no, you're just making it up. But I think there is a Valentine on Pluto. Just something about, again, the infinite detail that God's put out there. Just amazing. Goes on and on. Well, anyway, as we've studied all the other planets, and we haven't been to any other planet yet. We may get to Mars one of these days. Pluto is a long ways out there. One conclusion from this whole space age, here, I'll just put it in this slide here. There's no place like home. I think that's what we've thoroughly learned. Space is a huge place, a lot of stuff out there, but special attention has been given to the Earth. I think that's what we are learning over and over again. Now, thinking about Pluto and how special the Earth is, how about this question? Are there aliens? Is there life in space? You notice who I put in the flying saucer, by the way? The grandkids know those. Those are the Veggie Tales. I was just trying to make something lively here for a Thursday night. Well, our conclusion would be that after this whole space age, 60 years since Sputnik, there is not a shred of evidence of life anywhere else. If there was, it'd make major headlines. Now, they keep looking, but space looks like a large and very quiet and lifeless place, doesn't it? Now, I want to be careful. I guess God could put life out there, maybe some kind of plant life. I don't know why he would do it. And it didn't evolve on its own if there is anything out there. But it looks more and more like we are special and we are unique and we're alone. Now, astronomers, they assume that evolution happened and it happened on Earth, so it should have happened elsewhere. So what astronomers are saying is, where is everybody? There should be abundant life elsewhere, and they're just not finding it at all. The more I think about this, I think maybe there is some scripture that kind of hits on this. Psalm 115:16. The highest heavens belong to the Lord, not to aliens, but the earth is a special place that he's given to man. I think that verse sounds more and more like we are unique and special, and I think we are, which is an important point. Hey, let me go back to that slide I skipped over. When I read the articles in the newspaper about the latest satellites in space, they always mention the search for life. There's this assumption today that if you can find a new planet out there, and maybe there could be some liquid water on it, and then if you let time go by and have some kind of energy source like sunshine, then life will show up. This is sort of an equation that they assume. And I look at this thing and I want to say, I don't think so. Life is not that simple. You don't just add water. We've all had some biology, like inside a living cell. We don't know the half of what's going on there, the incredible complexity and all kinds of life. So nice try, but it's not that way. You'll just kind of notice that when you read articles. Yes, maybe we'll find life out there. They're so hopeful. I guess just this idea that we want to contact somebody. Now, I know that there's angels out there, there's a spirit world, but aliens, I don't think so. Let me just get away from astronomy again for a minute, since I was talking about alien life, just to be more general for a moment here. The word evolution, does it occur? Look at the stick figure, somebody was coming up with that idea. Well, this is kind of a tricky idea because the word evolution means change. And things do change in nature. In fact, in the laboratory, they come up with different types of cats and dogs. It's genetic type stuff they do. However, the cats stay cats, and the dogs stay dogs. There are changes that occur, even in nature, but there are limits to that change. So let me further qualify this answer here and say there's two different types of change. There's a large-scale change, macroscopic. That would be like a lizard turning into a bird. That's a big change. And then there are small scale changes like different types of cats or different kinds of frogs or whatever. Microscopic or I don't even like the word evolution. I would prefer to talk about change as being variation in the created kinds. There's a dog kind, a cat kind, and so it has ever been, these different categories. And again, some room for variation, but there are some limits. And these small changes don't add up to a macro change. Again, there are limits there. I just mentioned that verse, Genesis 1:24, well, that whole chapter, that phrase, that things reproduce after their kind, that little phrase is mentioned 10 times in Genesis chapter 1. Just to really pound it in, I guess, that this is how it is, that there are kinds of creatures. And that's certainly what we see in the fossil record as well, these distinct kinds. So I'm going to deny this idea, macroevolution, I believe is out, the evidence is not there. Here's that idea that lizards turn into birds, if you've heard that one. And is that what they're teaching our kids? My goodness. Actually, according to Scripture, the birds are made on day number 5, and the dinosaur animals on day number 6. So it was the other way around, but they didn't change. It's, in God's realm, the way this works out. Whatever you look at in the details when God makes all these creatures, he had some humor, didn't he? And I like these pictures of some of the creatures that God made in the creation week. So here, you can pick out your favorite one. I mean, what wonderful creatures we have, both in the fossil record and in a zoo today, looking at us on a Thursday night. I didn't put my favorite one on the screen. That would be this one. Have you heard of the blobfish in the depths of the ocean? Yeah, now if you're fishing and you catch one of these, let him go. He deserves to live. So anyway, I'm kind of wandering into evolution just a little bit here, having some fun with it, but as you know, the evidence for macroevolution is it's just not there. And so somebody said, well, forget animals, what about people? What did our ancestors look like? Were there cavemen and cave women? What do you think the answer to this should be? We're doing some question answer tonight. The answer is yes, there still are. Some of the bad guys do over there in the Middle East. The thing is, there are not ape men, something half animal, half person. That's where it gets kind of misleading. But if you live in a cave in the outdoors, and they've been in the Old Testament and still today, so yes, but not animal-like at all. So kind of a little sneaky difference there to show that. And what about these different finds that they get of our alleged ancestors? And you've heard of these different fossils. You read about them in National Geographic magazine. They're always one or the other. These finds are always either 100% modern person or 100% animal. They have not found this connecting link. It's still missing because there is no such thing. We are not animals. In fact, we are created to care for the animal world. So that's kind of where this goes, one or the other, when the dust settles and they finally stop arguing about these things. So you've heard of fossils like Lucy, an animal, 100%. They're not even sure if it's a male or a female. And then there's things like the Neanderthals, people living in Old Testament times after the flood probably. In the Neanderthal burials, they can find trinkets like they were having cemetery, like they were having funeral services. I mean, outdoor people, kind of rugged, but people. And so it should always be people, what they find are in one category or the other. Here's another phrase that shows up now and then. Have you heard of this one, theistic evolution? Supporters of this would say, who are we to pick on evolution? I mean, all the universities go along with this, and so do the nature specials. So maybe God used evolution. Maybe you got to put them together and compromise them. Theistic evolution, and God orchestrated evolution. This is a very popular approach, and I think it's very dangerous. It just starts you down that path of compromising God's word, and then where do you stop? You don't need to do this. Biblical creation is so refreshing. It's just fun to think about how God made it, rather than try to build into these and compromises often cause more trouble than you had in the first place. Now, I teach at a Christian college, Grace College, and we've stuck to it. We're a good, strong creationist school. By the way, my college is where John Whitcomb had a whole career. If you're into Whitcomb and Morris, and there, that's why I went there, to take all of John Whitcomb's courses long ago. But a lot of Christian colleges have done this and have compromised. There's just a handful left that are sticking with creation, and they're needed today. So anyway, that is an area that it just causes more trouble. Oh boy, my next question and answer. I'm sorry I need to do this one. But the question is the earth flat? I'm hitting them all tonight, folks. Somehow, there's a resurgence of this idea in our day. In fact, they just had a big conference on this down in Florida by people who will accept the idea of a flat earth. I don't even know how you would do this. What is this all about? Are we losing ground here in our country? Yeah, there are people who are saying NASA's wrong, they're lying to us, the earth is not round, it's flat, and there it is. Oh my goodness. Don't buy into this, don't give it the time of day, but I just thought I ought to react to this. Actually, what some of these folks do is they go to Scripture, and they say, see, you get this from the Bible. Like over there in the book of Revelation, where it talks about the angels at the four corners of the earth. Ah, the four corners, flat earth. Well, that's talking about the directions, north, south, east, west. You know, it's not talking about the geography of the earth. There are other verses that are making it quite clear that the earth is suspended in space, and all you need to do is look at the sun or the moon and see that they're round, they're spherical, and likewise is the earth. The flat earth idea, my goodness, what'll come up next? Let me move on from that. Let me do just a couple of practical thoughts here. Just in this whole area of astronomy and space and God's creation, a light year. You hear that phrase? It's a little confusing because it's not a time, even though we have the word year. It's a distance. And just to make it clear, to show how large creation is, a light year is about 6 trillion miles. It's the distance that light travels during all of 2017, if it doesn't bump into anything. And there's that kind of space out there. So it's a distance, it's like a long yardstick that astronomers use. Rounded off a little bit there, but 6 trillion miles. So when we hit the light switch in this room, it looks like instantly the lights are on, but you know, it takes a nanosecond or so for it to get here. And in space, a whole year for light to travel 6 trillion miles. It just, astronomers ought to be humble people. You know, they work with these kind of numbers, these vast distances. Now, of course, the sun is our nearest star, but the next nearest star is 4 of these, 4 light years away. And then from there, it just goes on up to bigger and bigger distances. On day number 4, when God makes the heavens, how vast it is, and on it goes. Another quick thought here. You know, in biblical creation, we stick to the idea of a universe that's only a few thousand years old. Not that we know the exact day, but I think 6,000 years makes a lot more sense than anything else. And when you add up the genealogies in the book of Genesis, you come up with about that much, a few thousand years. So then this question arises, how can we see distant starlight if the place isn't that old? I mean, some of these stars are billions of light years away. Billions of light years. In fact, I think that this universe is far larger than anybody's dreamed. I'm thinking trillions, I'm thinking even more. Why not? We haven't seen any edge to the universe. Every year, new telescopes look further and further. I think on day 4, when God made the heavens, He made it really large, maybe even infinite in size. Anyway, we're seeing what we can. So that brings back this question, should we even be seeing these stars yet? If it takes that long for the light to get here? Do you see the problem? This is brought up when you're talking about the young earth, the recent creation. I'm not sure what the answer is. Let me give you a couple possibilities. Some would say that those stars really aren't that far away from us. that someone is sort of fudging the data. And all the stars are close, and so the light got here quickly. I'm going to cross that one out. The stars are a long ways away from us because they're very large and they look like little Christmas lights out there. They're way out. Some of my creation friends get very technical about this question. And they say, well, back there in the creation week, there were different ways to tell time. And while 6 days were going on earth when God was creating things here, in the heavens there were billions of years going by for the galaxies to be made, for their light to get here. This is called relativistic cosmology. There are books on this, and I think, well, that's interesting. But these theories keep coming by. Let me go to this third one here. I would just suggest that when God makes those stars and galaxies, he makes them with their light thoroughly spread out, all the way here. In fact, maybe he makes the light in transit before he even makes the star. Adam and Eve, the very first night they're here, when they go look at the sky, couldn't they see the stars? I mean, that's the whole purpose of them, to show the signs and seasons and God's glory. They didn't have to wait for that light to trickle across space. So I prefer that idea of a mature creation. Now, there are problems with that as well. It's an interesting question how you can see them in a young universe. We just do. We do see the stars. And so this question may go on of how it really works. These kind of questions don't really bother me. The more I've gone through my science career, I've realized there's enough questions to go around. Everybody's got questions. Don't evolutionists? How did life begin on planet Earth? The origin of life? They don't know. Where do the laws of nature come from? The law of gravity, the laws of thermo? They don't know. So they've got questions, we've got questions. And so we work on these possible solutions, and again, some of my technical friends trying to do this kind of thing, and let them go for it. Time will tell how close we all were someday. So how can we see distant stars? Different approaches there. In fact, some of the books on the table back there also give some of the details if you're into those kind of questions. Just a couple more practical ideas here. What is a shooting star? Have you seen one? Of course, we call them that, but they're not really stars because stars don't shoot. They're so far away, they could not travel clear across the sky. They'd be breaking the speed limit. No, when you see one of these flashes across the sky, you know, you're looking at a small, probably about the size of a coin or a pebble. You can hold it in your hand. And there's a lot of this kind of debris in space, and as we circle the sun, we sweep up that with our gravity, and then it falls through the air, and it moves so fast it heats up and vaporizes, so then you see that streak in the sky. So really, these are the smallest things you can see, pebble size, and then they light up for a second or two. And then you make a wish when you see one of these shooting stars. Now, sometimes in the year, we go through a whole cloud of this debris, and then they have what's called a meteor shower. And on occasion, they have a meteor storm where we have a lot of these. Have not been one during our lifetimes, but sometimes in the past, it's like the whole sky had been lit up at night. People thought the world was ending. I think the Lord ought to do that again. Go through a whole cloud of that debris and make people think of what's going on. But anyway, that's what these things are. They're just part of nature. I don't know whether there was a lot of debris left over from creation or whether it's comets that have fallen to pieces, but we have these small pebbles that we kind of sweep up as time goes by. How many stars do we know that there are up to this year? This is a picture of some stars. I think that's an actual photograph. Well, I think they've done some color enhancement here. But if you can get away from the city lights, stars do have some interesting colors, which is their different surface temperatures. The blue stars are the hottest. The yellowish, reddish stars are not so hot. Anyway, they're all hot inside. So here's a whole field full of stars. So we need to have a number here. How many stars have been photographed up through this year? Nobody can count them, certainly. What we do is we'll take maybe one small section of the sky, kind of mark it off, like maybe 1 square inch, and count the stars in that little square, and then extrapolate over the whole sky, including the southern hemisphere. And if you do that, you can come up with a ballpark estimate of the known stars. And it's a number like this. We have the number 1 followed by 22 zeros. Oh, there it is in words, 10 billion trillion stars. I think this may just be the first drop in the bucket. If it's really far larger than we've dreamed, remember my suggestion. So this is what we know about so far. Of course, we're guessing here. Now, Scripture does say that God numbers the stars. In fact, He's got names for all of them. It's just in a whole different realm altogether. But anyway, that's quite a number. Just to get a little comprehension of this, what if we could take all these stars and divide them up? Okay, one for you, one for me, one for somebody over in France, the whole world. If you would take this number and divide by the world's population, how many would be your fair share? How many stars would you get? Well, we got about 7 billion people in the world. Let's think about, the grandkids and their kids. We could crank it up to 10 billion. So if you divide this by 10 billion, it comes out to be 1 trillion. We'd have 1 trillion stars apiece. 1 trillion stars? We're all rich. No, they're not ours. And by the way, what are these stars like? The only one that we get a good look at is the sun, our nearest star, our greater light that rules the day. So I'm thinking about the sun now, representing all of those other stars. Suppose that the sun were hollow, like a basketball. It's not, but suppose it is. And poke a little hole in it. Could you fit a whole Earth inside the sun? Now, this is a pretty good sized planet we live on. You guys have traveled around the world maybe. You could fit a whole world inside the sun. In fact, how many do you think you could fit in there? Anybody got a number tonight? How many Earths could fit inside the sun? You got one?
1 million?
There's the answer already. Sold. I was hoping to have an auction here. See, when I ask the little kids, they'll say, 38? Now, since that's the biggest number you can think of, if you do the math, 1 million Earth would easily fit inside the sun. They'd rattle around like little BBs inside a basketball. It's amazing. Of course, the sun is not hollow. None of those things are. They're filled with chemicals and radiation, temperature, and energy. And speaking of energy, the sun gives off more energy in 1 second than mankind has produced since Adam and Eve. Every second. So you say, well, is it going to run out of gas? Are we going to be in trouble here? And then so maybe the sun kind of gets rested up at night. See, I teach college. I've heard them all. No, the sun is always blazing, of course. And if you could somehow see the gas gauge of the sun, it's still pinned on full. It's actually turning hydrogen into helium, and the Lord has provided the sun with enough hydrogen to last forever. Certainly through this whole age that we live in, the gas tank is still full. There's another way to look at this number, by the way, of 22 zeros. In the summertime, you go to the seashore and walk in the sand around the Great Lakes or wherever. Now, engineering people are real good at estimating numbers. And so you could estimate how many grains of sand, let's say, you could hold in your hand. And then you could estimate, well, how many handfuls would there be on this shoreline? And then all the shorelines of the whole planet. You can come up with an estimate of sand grains on the shore of the whole Earth. You know what number you come up with? Same number. We're going to spend a little time tomorrow night, if you can come to our other society talking. Well, that'll be fun proving that. Sand grains, but we'll try it. But anyway, the numbers are in the same ballpark. In fact, that kind of reminds you, stars in the heaven or sand on the seashore. God was talking to Abraham and said, your offspring will be that kind of number. Not that it means it's this many, it just means you can't count them. But, sons of Abraham, we're part of that as well. And it continues to grow. Interesting comparison. As many stars as sand grains on all the seashores of the planet. Down to my last couple of questions here, as we were kind of breezing through some astronomy. Oh yeah, this one. Is the universe expanding? What do you think? Does it take you longer to get to the store? Or to get to work? Well, the answer to this seems to be yes. It does appear that the universe is expanding. Not that the Earth is getting bigger, or the solar system, or even our own Milky Way galaxy, but deep space. It appears that the galaxies are spreading out. So it's a deep space type thing, but it's getting larger every day. This is sometimes taken as evidence for the Big Bang. See, it was smaller a year ago, smaller yet 100 years ago, and you can back that all the way up to a nugget. I think that's an unfair extrapolation. I would suggest that this universe was made large and getting larger. It was created in an expanding situation. Scripture says that God spread out the heavens, and I think they're still spreading. And there's even a reason for this. In creation, if you just take all the stars and galaxies and kind of park them out there sitting still like static, you know what will happen? Gravity is everywhere, and everything will start to fall in together, and we would have a collapse. We would have the big crunch. This expansion makes the universe stable. You need to have all these motions to live here. I mean, the Earth has to keep moving around the sun, or we'll fall into it. And likewise, the Earth around the sun and the moon around the Earth. You need to have all these different motions, and this is one of them for a stable, for a faithful type universe. By the way, if you got lost on all this stuff, and this astronomy can kind of wear you down, this kind of helps me when I'm thinking of what God made, like miles per gallon, MPG. This is kind of the hierarchy. M could stand for the moon, our nearest neighbor. Then P would stand for the planets. That's our neighborhood, the solar system. And then finally you run into the G, the galaxies. We live in one called the Milky Way. There's another one called Andromeda. And these galaxies, these big spirals, that's what fills up the universe. They're like islands spread across space as far as we can see. These big swirling whirlpools of stars. So anyway, that's kind of the whole list as you go from smaller to larger. So let me just finish up by saying one more thing about these galaxies that's kind of interesting. Now that looks like a nebula, that looks like a gas cloud, but really that's a whole lot of stars. Yeah, a lot of them in the middle for that kind of brighter nucleus area, and then the arms as well. We don't have a good picture of our Milky Way, of course, but if we did, it would look something like this. And we live actually out of one of those spiral arms, we think. But anyway, there's a lot of these islands spread across space. So as we study these galaxies, you can see them slowly turning, and you can see that how that would work, although they're so large, but they're rotating. And as we think about these galaxies and gravity, it appears to us that these galaxies should be disintegrating. They're turning fast enough that they should fall apart. It's almost like on the playground, if you get the merry-go-round going too fast, you know how the kids would go flying off? They like to do that. We've all done that. That's what these galaxies seem to be like. They're big enough and spinning fast enough that they should have gone to pieces by now. But they don't. They stay very compact together like this, as round and round they go. And so astronomers have said there must be something holding these galaxies together that we can't find. They talk about the missing mass. They talk about dark matter. And they're looking and looking for more material, some kind of mass, some kind of particles, something that would cause gravity pulling in, holding these things together. Now, this is not a simple problem, because they say that 90% of these galaxies is missing. 90% of the universe seems to be missing. That's kind of embarrassing. But they are, holding together. They're stable. So thinking about this problem, a verse comes to mind. Colossians 1:17, one of these creation verses. And it says that by Christ, that all things were made and consist and hold together. I'm thinking about that verse. It tells me that at some point, this physical world, galaxies, must interface with the spirit world, with our Maker. Could it be that there is no dark matter, but instead it's God's hand holding these things in place? I want to be careful because, once in a while we do find something new in science, but they've been looking for this dark matter for decades and can't find it. So I think maybe science has hit the wall here. We don't understand galaxies. God's got his hand on them. I am sure that if the Lord would turn his back on this creation for one instant, what do you think would happen? Wow. Chaos. There goes the laws. There goes everything. It would just be, it would fall apart, wouldn't it? Somebody has to maintain these laws that we have, whether it's Newton's laws or gravity or whatever. So thank you, Lord, for your patience holding this all together the way we act. But I think that verse has something to do with it, that certainly he's behind it all, even the stability of these galaxies. Hey, we made it through. We didn't cover everything, all those great details, but I think we did what we could. By the way, if you ever run into any questions on this, or you have grandkids that need to do a paper, you're welcome to give me a call. I like to respond to email. That's where I am over at Grace College, and I enjoy learning stuff myself as well. So I'm glad to be a resource for anybody who needs some insight. Not that I've got all the answers, but fun to look at it. Hey, we got just maybe a few minutes left. If anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask, or any additions to the minutes of our meeting, yes, sir.
Do you have any comments on black holes?
Black holes. I know they make movies about them. What is a black hole? It's a theoretical idea, and the thought is that some of the larger stars, they do run out of gas. They use up their hydrogen, and some of those larger stars will collapse, and they get smaller, as small as the moon, as small as the basketball, and finally the whole innards of the star just kind of goes down to nothing. Nothing stops the gravity, and so it goes down to no size at all, and so then it's just a black hole. It's a concentration of matter in just a pinpoint, and the gravity would be so strong that even light could not escape. Light would kind of like make a U-turn if it was trying to get out of there. So black holes are thought to be dead stars. Now, we're not even sure that there is such a thing. I know there are some indications in the sky where there may be. We see some stars that are orbiting, it looks like they're orbiting nothing. Maybe they're going around the black hole, but maybe there's other explanations. Time will tell whether there are lots of black holes or none. I expect there are, but it's a theoretical idea. And if there are black holes, they're just really a part of the decay, the waxing old of the universe, because they are stars that have wound down and died. That's what a black hole is, a star that's reached the end. But stay away from them. They have strong gravity. They would pull you in. Yes, sir.
One thing, you talk about the dark matter thing and dark energy. Dark energy was even more than the dark matter, I think, as far as the percentage of the universe that it supposedly is. But that's kind of what I like about it. It's another kind of relativistic theory, I guess, but the John Hartnett one, it just totally eliminates the need for dark matter, dark energy. It explains the physics within that cosmology instead of having to resort to something like that in order to explain what you see. His theory kind of covers, these anomalous redshifts and all that stuff that they see out there, and,
yes,
and the spinning of the galaxies and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like that one. I'd like to learn more about it, reread it, and try to actually get it down, but I just remember being really fascinated back when I read that.
Yes. He's mentioning the name John Hartnett, and then there's Russ Humphreys. These are creationists who are highly technical, and they write interesting stuff. And we do need to remind ourselves that they are building models of what space might be like. That's not necessarily reality, but they're doing what they can. They're modeling, and they're gifted in that area. Someday we'll find out how close it all was when we get a better look at it. It gets beyond me, but let them go for it and come up with all these different options and ideas, how close to the truth they are. Who knows? But it's good to have those kind of guys on our side. Yes, ma'am.
I have friends that aren't believers, and they're talking always about this. I think they called it Nibiru at one time. This big planet that's around the sun, and it's headed towards Earth. And have you heard about all that? Do you have anything to say about it?
Yes, I have heard about that. That's right in there with the flat Earth idea, I think. This is the idea that there may be another planet, and as we go around the sun, if you think about it, if you had another planet which was always opposite the sun from us, you'd never see it. It would always be like it'd be hidden. And so that's one suggestion, that there's such a thing, and then at some point it comes swooping in close to us and causes pestilence and famine in the end of the world. Gravity is so dependable. If there was another planet anywhere in our neighborhood, we would know it. We would feel its signature. In fact, that's how we detected Neptune. We could see there was a mystery planet pulling on the other planets, and yep, it turned out to be Neptune. So if there was such a place, we would know about it. Now, there may be other sorts of planets way out there beyond Pluto. We're not sure just what the extent of the solar system is. But the idea of a mystery large planet that comes in every so often and does destruction and all that, it's not there. I almost know what those people are thinking of. They've become skeptical of science and often of the government, and they think it's all conspiracy and that this is going on and we're just not being told.
Yeah, that's exactly.
I'm not a conspiracy nut.
They won't believe me either, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yes. So, but yes, especially the internet is full of those far out ideas.
Yeah.
And we got enough real problems to work on without some of those. So it seems to capture the interest of people, along with aliens and other things. Again, I teach college, and these students, they're bewildered by this. Did we really go to the moon? Are there aliens? They don't know who to believe, these poor college kids, because they're getting hit with all these people that are trying to rewrite history and question things. So then I tell them, and they say, well, why should I believe you? No, we've got good kids at Grace College. Yeah, Jim?
You talked about the God creating the universe as a mature universe, giving us our light and all that. And so that, what about, and you also mentioned in your talk about God stretching the universe. And at that point, if he's stretching the universe, he's probably stretching the light too. Any thoughts on the comparison of those two things?
I would say that God stretching out the universe is kind of poetic. I'm not sure whether I want to tie that to the expansion of the universe as if it's still stretching out or not, but it's a neat way to talk about how he made everything. Thinking about space and those far out galaxies, I would say that when God makes Andromeda and these objects in deep space, I would say at the moment when he makes those, this is on day number 4, when he makes the sun, moon, and stars, I would have no problem saying the speed of light was infinite. God made the stars, the light is here. And then reset that speed to the value that we measure today. The speed of light is very constant. Some of you know that value, 186,000 miles per second. So perhaps at creation it was infinite. It wasn't a slow change. It was probably a reset to the value that we have today, which has been ever since. We measure the speed of light very carefully, and it seems a constant. I like to have constants in nature, and it does not vary. So that, I guess that'd be my take on it. Yeah, I want to be a little careful stretching it out. It's a little bit of guesswork to say that it's still stretching from that creation, but it is getting larger. But again, the reason for that is stability. Good questions. Yes, Bill?
I'm just wondering what the implication is of this dark matter and dark energy dilemma in terms of the standard model of nuclear physics. It must be a humbling thing to a nuclear physicist to find out that he can only explain 5% of the mass. Doesn't this in kind imply that the whole standard model is up for grabs?
The standard model, which would include the whole Big Bang scenario, that is the standard view. And the way these things go, you build it up and you keep supporting it. Sooner or later, these theories seem to get overturned, and that's kind of like a revolution where we went from a geocentric to a heliocentric view. But those things don't happen easily. People have their whole careers invested in the Big Bang, and so do their graduate students, and so it's hard for them to think of anything different. But yeah, it's just there. It's the big view. If you don't accept, even in spite of what's missing, if you don't accept the Big Bang, you can't get funded you can't get a job in a university. It's just, you know, they have a hold of things.
Oh, my
So not sure what to say about that, but there's a lot we don't know. My goodness, my world is physics. What holds atoms together? Why do those electrons keep going around the nucleus without falling in? We can write an equation for it, but why? Why is that? We do not know. We don't know anything. Yeah, Jim?
I just had one more. I remember when you were saying all the purposes for the moon,
Yeah.
and it just struck me when you were reading those how close it comes to Genesis. Let there be lights in the expanse to separate the day from the night. Let them be for signs and for seasons and days and years, to give light upon the earth. And it was so. Two great lights, greater to rule the day, lesser to rule the night. Set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on earth, to rule over the day and the night. Separate. And it was good. And it was just like, you know, you said about seasons and how, you know, we need the moon for seasons, and it says it's for seasons, and, you know, it's for a nightlight, and he said it's for a nightlight. And it just seemed like when I went down that list, there were so many of them that are just right here where God said, this is what they're for. So anyway, I just decided to comment.
Yeah, yeah. I've been thinking about the moon, and by this, that could go on and on.
Yeah.
You know, they're starting to harness the tides for energy, to pump water, to make electricity. They're using lunar tides, so the moon even gives us a source of energy. That's probably an endless list. Hey, let me end with a quick commercial here. You folks involved with your local group here, and that's great. There's a lot of good groups around the country. You've heard of many of them. In Dallas, you have the ICR, the Institute for Creation Research. Back in Kentucky, you've got the museum people, Answers in Genesis, AIG. Also down in Australia and in Atlanta, you've got the name is slipping from my mind.
Creation Ministries.
Creation Ministries International.
Thank you, Creation Ministries International, CMI. Well, I wanted to say that those groups all come from one other group, the Creation Research Society, the CRS, which is the parent of all of them. And the CRS, you ought to belong to it. It's a group that I'm closely connected with in a volunteer way. The CRS is about 60 years old, and we have a technical quarterly. We have a very readable Creation Matters magazine we put out. And it's the only group that you become a member of. There's a membership, at least a professional society. This is the Creation Research Society. We've got about 1,700 members all around the world, guys and gals, both in science and math, but also regular people like us. So anywhere, somewhere along the line, you ought to think one more group to join, the CRS. It's a good group. Well, with that, I'll close off, but I'll be sticking around if you want to talk some more. Thank you, folks.